4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, episode 3. Let's get going.
Oh boy.
First off, I want to say my bad on last week. We don't have video for last week because there were some technical difficulties. So if you want to listen to it, it's on Apple Podcasts under Cherish the True Seeker. Okay, now that that's out of the way, we can start for real.
Okay. A lot of things to talk about this week. I don't know. You start. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff.
A ton of stuff. But one thing, we talked a little bit about it last week, and I wanted to bring it up again, and kind of in a different aspect, is we talked a little bit about the environment and kind of how we feel about ways to mess with that. Not mess with it, but how you fix that issue. And I kind of just wanted to hear a little bit more about your position on that.
Oof. Okay, so the environment is probably one of the more complex issues that I try to have an opinion on, but it's hard to have an opinion on an issue like that. So here's what I think. I think global warming's real. I think that the projections for how serious global warming will get have all been wildly inaccurate
So you're
so
a climate
far.
change denier, is what I'm hearing.
No. No, the projections have always been off by quite a bit for climate change, which is fine. They usually overestimate rather than underestimate. That's fine. But after seeing article and scientific study after scientific study being published, it's like the world's going to end by 2025 or the world's going to end by 2030. No, it's not. Okay. So we have to take long-term ideas and implement them now, right? What we can't do is say, let's implement the Green New Deal. Let's cut out oil. Let's cut out gas.
Well, wasn't part of the Green New Deal no
Like
planes,
like no planes, like
and,
they have to convert
cow
to like
farts were in it as a problem, as a serious problem that you had to get rid of. It's
and
like
there's a lot of things in the Green New Deal that were weird, but I think that you implement long-term strategy now to resolve climate change in the future. Now, the Green New Deal has failed in a lot of ways, but I think it wasn't a real piece of legislation. I think it was more of a, like, let's bait the Republicans and conservatives because we can, which was pretty smart. Like, everyone took the bait. Like,
well, I think it's like if you ask for a mile when you really want a foot, then you're way more likely to get the little steps. So you ask for something crazy like that, and then you get what you actually need.
Yeah. No, I think that, implementing strategy now for the long term is going to be the most effective. I think that there does need to be a shift from oil to renewable energy, or even nuclear. I think that I hate to say the market is going to resolve this because I don't believe in that sort of bull crap. I don't believe the market fixes all problems. I think the government should, but this is something that we've seen the market start to correct with like Tesla and like solar.
That's true,
and all of this stuff. So the market is sort of correcting it, but if the government continues laying out certain benefits for switching over, like, you know, they have the solar tax credit, or they have in California, they have a tax credit for buying a Tesla.
Yeah.
There's like certain perks you can ride in the carpool lane. Like, if the government continues with those sorts of programs and those sorts of benefits to switching to renewable energy, I think that's a good strategy for the long term. Now, for right now, if we were to say, let's just hypothetically say the Green New Deal got implemented today. Let's say that AOC was president, executive order, bang, Green New Deal. I think that thousands of people would lose their jobs. In fact, I know hundreds of thousands actually would lose their jobs. It would be catastrophic for the economy, and our society and our economy right now can't handle that. We can't handle an outright shift from a source of energy in a major sector of our economy to an entirely different sector of our economy that requires, I mean, just the labor the labor issues with switching that quickly alone are going to be huge.
Yeah, my only question with that though is like, where do you start? Because there will always be the problem that when you start switching over, you lose jobs in traditional energy sectors. So I don't know. In my opinion, you kind of have to bite the bullet eventually. to where you do have to cut those jobs.
Sure. So sorry to cut you off. What I think you do is the government provides, I don't know, 80% salary to those that get laid off from the energy sector. Assuming that we really want to take big action now, the best way to cut back against an economic downturn and like having these you've seen what happened to coal communities that are no longer existing.
I mean,
they're like
all the opioid epidemic.
Yeah, that is part of why the opioid epidemic happened. So you provide 80% salary, you provide health benefits to those that are laid off, assuming they're able to apply for at least one job per month in any sector they like, but preferably the renewable energy sector. Yeah. I think that's how you transition from fossil fuels to renewables. But like I said, if you do it too quickly, it's going to hurt the economy and it's going to hurt people's lives. I'm not saying that global warming is not important, because it is, but I'm saying that if we take too drastic of an action now, we're going to pay the consequences. And I think that those consequences outweigh potential consequences in the recent years. Now, I think long-term global warming is more of a threat. I think right now, if we were to just cut out a bunch of people's jobs, that's more of a threat to the economy and people's lives.
Yeah, so I think, though, you run into the issue where it's impossible to know when that switches, where you get to the point where the damage done by global warming and climate change is going to be more than the damage done right now. So I think it seems more practical to me to err on the side, or not practical, but makes more sense to me to err on the side of if being too early to switch over than it is to being late to a point where there's catastrophic climate change that's going to destroy the planet. And so I think where you run into an issue with saying, well, if we switch over, we lose jobs, is eventually it's too late. And we don't know when that is. There's been a lot of estimates, and you were kind of talking earlier that they've been inaccurate a lot of the time. But eventually one of them is going to be right. And when you hit that point of no return, you're going to wish that you could go back and cut those jobs.
I suppose, like I said, I'm no sort of climatologist. I can barely understand the studies that they come out with, but yeah. I think that I know that the studies have been exaggerated over time, and I know that there were even some scientific research papers that said that we were already past the point of no return. They said that by 2020 right now, we would be facing catastrophic consequences. Like I said, I'm not a climatologist. I don't know if any of that stuff is happening. But I do know that the economic effects of switching to renewables are there. And I don't know if it's popular enough among the American people to go through a whole switch to renewables. I just don't think it's popular enough, which is fine. I think that change needs to happen. But I think if you want to get the government to change things, you have to change public opinion, right? Because right now, I think if you were to go out and ask 10 people of voting age, let's say between 30 and 40, probably close to half would think that I would say over half would say we can't do an entire switch to renewables.
But I think that's where you come in. I mean, that's why we're a representative republic and not a pure democracy, because we're not climate scientists, environmental scientists, and that's probably a good preface for everything. We're not experts on anything, so most of the stuff we say is just opinion. But that's 99.9% of the American population that don't. I think there's enough of a issue that has been seen by climate scientists and people like that I don't know if the general public has seen that, and so that might be part of the reason why they're not reacting as harshly against it.
So whose responsibility is it to get that information out to the public?
I think the government. I think they're trying.
Not this administration.
Well, not this administration.
Or Obama's administration for that. I mean, he implemented some regulations, but for the most part, we didn't see any major climate reform.
But so that's the thing is we should see major climate reform is my idea. So it's not just because information isn't getting out doesn't mean that it's going to go away. So
let me ask you this. This is sort of unrelated, but you talked about how the vast majority of Americans don't know about climate change. They don't know the real effects of climate change. So who do you trust? Do you trust the American population or do you trust the experts? Even if the American population don't know.
I think on some stuff you have to trust the experts.
See, that seems weird to me.
But
that seems like a slippery slope.
Yeah, I agree in some parts, but I think what happens is there are costs, if we take it back to the economic impacts, there are costs associated with climate change that nobody but the experts can understand. That is the full scope. They can't understand the full scope. The general public can't understand the full scope. And so that's where you need to come in and listen to the experts. It's really easy for people to understand, oh, these people are losing their jobs. How do you quantify 10 acres of rainforest in the Amazon as opposed to a coal miner's job in Pennsylvania? It's difficult, and I think that's where the experts come in and you have to listen to them on those issues.
So I sort of agree, and I don't want to compare apples to oranges here, but they said the same thing about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction. Okay, they said the experts, we have intelligence that that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. That information has not been and probably will never be released to the public who didn't know about it. The federal government went into Iraq and killed Saddam Hussein. They essentially invaded Iraq without the consent of the American public. Now, the American public was uninformed. They were just listening to what the talking heads in government said. And like I said, I don't want to compare apples to oranges, but I think that's the same sort of idea of just because the American public doesn't know about something, it doesn't mean they shouldn't have a say in it, right? I can form an opinion about, in fact, I do. I have numbers of opinions about things I have no idea about. Yeah. And it's just because I can, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's sort of the same idea with representative government is you can have an idea about something that you don't necessarily know or care about, but you can have an opinion on it because you can.
Yeah, but I think that's where those unforeseen, like the negative externalities that come from climate change, that's where the experts have to come in and show. So if you go and you know all the costs of climate change and the costs of switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy, then sure, let the general public make a decision. But right now, I don't think you understand those costs. I don't think most people understand those costs, or frankly, anybody understands those costs. But the experts on the subject are definitely the closest to understanding those costs. So I trust the American public to make a decision when there's when there's a knowledge of the facts. So that's why I think comparing climate change to going into Iraq doesn't make a ton of sense, because it was kind of an unsubstantiated fact, whereas I think climate change is less of an unsubstantiated claim as...
But there's a lot of people that feel, and I'm not one of them, like I say, I believe climate change is real. I think it poses a threat to the American people, but there's a lot of people that don't see climate change as that same threat. Now, there's mostly general consensus among the experts. It's the experts' responsibility to inform and sway the American public. Now, if the American public wanted climate change reform, policies like the Green New Deal, and maybe they do. Maybe Joe Biden will get elected and we'll see climate change reform. Mm-hmm. But so far, we've been through Bill Clinton, George Bush, Obama, and Trump, and none of them have done anything for climate change. So I think that for the most part, the American people, and I don't know if most of them don't know about the effects of climate change. I think most people do know that it's a threat. I just think that most people are in the boat where it's like, it's a threat, but I don't have time to worry about it, right? They have other things to worry about, which I'm not saying is okay. I'm not saying it's good to think like that. Mm-hmm. It's not, but that's sort of how American society is, right? We're less focused about things in the future, and we're more focused on the now. We're more focused on fixing issues right now. I think that implementing long-term steps, so let's say, a certain policy this year, it expands the next year, the next year, the next year, over the next X amount of years. I think that's the most effective way to address climate change. And I don't think the experts would push back on that, right? And I think that you could substantiate that to the American people much easier than saying we need drastic climate change reform right now.
Yeah, and obviously I don't think we need, I do think we need drastic climate change soon, if not right now. But I don't think, not immediate. I think drastic can also apply to the ways we go about things, looking at how we look at renewable energy. If I think drastic could be spending $100 billion a year on research for renewable energy. I think that would count as drastic, but not be that overnight switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy that would hurt the economy that much. And I think that's a way to start even switching over. If you took a portion of the government's budget and started spending it on, that creates jobs. If you invested $100 billion into climate change research or renewable energy research, that would create a ton of jobs, and maybe not for the same people that would lose jobs from switching over. But I think you have to do it at some point, and I think you need to start sooner rather than later.
I agree for the most part, right? So I think that investing into climate change research is a good idea. I think you're right. I think it does create jobs. I just don't want to create a vacuum in places where the primary source of income for, let's say, men over 20 years old is like in the fossil fuel sector.
Yeah.
I don't want to create more vacuums like that, where those communities suddenly become more susceptible to crime, drug use, homelessness. I don't want to create vacuums like that where, sure, it creates more jobs in the renewable energy sector, but for the jobs that it creates, it probably takes away too. So if more vacuums like that are created, I think that you're going to see an increase in drug use and homelessness, especially around especially around white men, because that's the majority of people that work in the energy sector.
Yeah.
So I think that's a little bit more dangerous. And like I said, I'm not like trying to say because they're white men it's more important. I care about every community all the same, but I think that's an important piece, is like the African American community has already been negatively affected for years. I don't want more communities to be affected like that across the United States.
Yeah, and I agree that I see that issue as well. Where I don't agree so much is the just putting off the issue. I think that's what we've been doing. That's what the previous administration, since climate change has kind of come to the forefront, have been doing, is putting off the issue. And I would push back against the idea that because previous administrations have not taken action on climate change, that it's because of the American public's opinion on climate change. I think we've seen the effects of big money and corporations in like campaign finance and lobbying, that has shown that that's really not the American public's opinion isn't what determines the actions of the president. I think there are special interests that have a bigger impact on how the administration, the executive branch acts than you think. I don't know.
So do you believe in changing campaign finance laws?
Oh, for sure, 100%. That is probably one of the biggest issues I think that could fix a lot of the problems that we have if you could change campaign finance laws.
So government-funded elections?
Maybe to a certain extent. I don't know so much government funded, maybe capped. Maybe you put a limit on how much you can spend. So instead of needing, how much did Mike Bloomberg spend? Like billions of dollars, right?
I don't even, yeah,
billions. I think it was billions of dollars.
Billions.
If you capped it at something like 50 million or something. Because there's a certain amount of money. You have to spend a lot of money to run a good campaign. but spending billions of dollars doesn't make sense, and you need donations. So it opens you up to being corrupted by special interests. Like, what if, are you really going to pursue climate change if ExxonMobil is the biggest donator to your campaign? It's just issues like that kind of screw over people that can't donate just massive amounts of money.
And I guess I think that is part of the problem. I think that, first of all, I don't know how the Supreme Court justices
Citizens United doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, in the Citizens United case, were able to come up with that route forward. I think it was Antonin Scalia that was the deciding vote in that case that sort of like set the path forward to corporations donating money equals free speech. I don't get that. I think that sets a dangerous precedent, and I think it's going to take a long time for that to be overturned, especially with the conservative majority on the Supreme Court. That being said, if we shouldn't have to rely on the Supreme Court for stuff like that anyway. We need to pass a law that says blah, blah, blah. We're restricting. I don't think companies should be able to donate money at all.
Well, even I think I don't completely disagree with the idea that companies can function as an entity that has political interests like an individual. But I think the idea that they can donate unlimited amounts of money to like a super PAC opens it up for so much corruption that needs to be drastically changed. So I think, in my opinion, the correct way to go about it is to just put a cap on how much companies can donate.
See, I disagree. I don't think a company should be able to make political donations at all, right? Because that gives them more political power. It gives them more political clout than just your average Joe, right? If I own a business that grossed $5 million, I have $500,000 to spend on any campaign I want, like, I'm going to have much more power in politics than someone else. And I don't believe that's how the American system was supposed to be set up.
But couldn't you make the same argument for, what if it's just a business owner donating?
Yeah, there should be he should be able to donate $1,200. There should be a $1,200 cap.
So you're going to set a cap at $1,200?
If not less, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you could take, I think to a certain extent, a government funded, if you set a cap like $1,000 to, I don't know the exact number. I don't know campaign finance well enough to set an exact number. But then maybe you say the government matches it or something, because no, you can get enough money to run a campaign. I mean, Bernie Sanders didn't take money from any big corporations.
Yep.
And he had enough money to run a campaign. So I think that's the best way to go about it, is just setting a cap. And I think depending on the cap though, a business, I think if you set a low enough cap, you could still let businesses donate. But
see, that's what I don't understand. A business is not a citizen. They do not have the right to engage in political activity or discourse in the United States. That's how I feel. A business should not have political clout in a representative democracy at all. A business should have zero political clout. That's my opinion. That's sort of like really far left, but that's how I feel. Any business should have zero political say or clout, and should certainly not have more political say or clout than the guy next door or any average person.
So would you say that's the same way with organizations like the NRA, or the NRA is the biggest example, is kind of organizations like that? Should they be able to donate, or should it just be individuals?
You're asking about special interests, right?
Yes, just special interests in general, not just businesses.
So it's hard to say, because lobbyist groups, special interest groups like the NRA, first of all, I think they do have too much power.
Yeah.
We know that. I think that they have influenced an inordinate, is that even a word? Inordinate?
Something like that. I don't know.
They have influenced thousands of elections over the course of decades. I think that those special interest groups should not have political clout in a representative democracy. That's just my opinion. Now, it gets a lot trickier because do I think groups like that should be able to exist? Of course. It's just hard for me to say that those political advocacy groups have done the American people good.
Oh, they definitely haven't.
I don't think so either. So, although I think they should be able to exist, I think they should be able to lobby if they'd like. I think that they should not be able to donate to political campaigns.
Yeah, the only argument against that, and I'm kind of with you on, I don't agree with, I think they hold too much power and businesses hold too much power, all special interests hold too much power, is as an organization where a lot of people are able to organize behind one common goal. So I think it makes a little bit of sense to me that you have this group that is representing people that have a common interest to the government, and organizing like that gives them more of a platform and ability to represent their members. But at the same time, I think you only have to do that because there's unlimited donations to campaigns, and that drowns out the voice of just the regular person, because if some billionaire donates $15 million to your campaign, it drowns out the voices of all these other people donating $20 or $100.
Sure. So I think that groups like the NRA, let's say they have 2,000 members that join, right? All of the members contribute to the NRA. That's where they can have their political clout, right? If they back a representative and say, look, you could have the approval of the NRA, like we can support you, but not financially, right? If they just come out and say the NRA supports this candidate for Congress, I mean, that's where they can still have political clout just because there's a lot of members of that group. I think that you ban those groups donating to political campaigns, but they can still have political clout just by having a lot of members of their group. Right?
Yeah, that's true. But do you do that with any group? I mean, like Black Lives Matter, the organization, not the movement, donates to Democratic candidates. Do you
Sure.
do you cap them? Say you can say Black Lives Matter supports Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm gonna do it on the right, I have
but
to
no
do it on the
donation.
left.
Yeah, exactly. So it's got to be consistent. Yeah, I think I agree with that for sure.
Did you? One thing I've always sort of wait. Did you hear? I'm not sure if we touched on this last week, but did you hear about the Supreme Court case involving the church and the casino?
Yeah, we did talk about that.
We
last
did?
week. Yeah.
Dang it, dude! I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about that.
Yeah,
I don't
that
remember
one's a
that
crazy one.
conversation.
Yeah, I think we talked about it last week. We can go over it again.
Okay, that's okay. Now
Yeah.
I'm worried that we already touched on it.
Yeah. I think. Oh, did you hear about the report that came out that Russia is backing Trump and China and Iran are backing Biden?
Yeah, I mean, Trump has been hard on China. He's been hard on Iran. He hasn't. I don't want to say he hasn't been as hard on Russia because he did put a bunch of tariffs on them after the stuff they did to Ukraine. I think that his rhetoric hasn't been as hard on Russia as like Obama's was.
Mm-hmm.
His criticism of Vladimir Putin surely isn't there. Vladimir Putin is an illegal, not illegal, but I mean,
he's a dictator trying to pass himself as a fairly elected president.
He's a dictator, right? I mean, dude, did you hear that he so about how long ago was it? Like it was during Corona. It was like during the height of Corona. He dissolved the Duma.
Yeah,
he didn't dissolve it, but he got the Speaker of the House to like.
It's basically the House of Representatives for Russia.
Right. Yeah, and the Speaker of the House like essentially. I can't even remember what they did.
Stood up of his own volition and said, you know what, I think we should let Vladimir Putin be president for life because that's going to be best for Russia. With no coercion from Putin at all, I guess, apparently, which I don't believe. But yeah, definitely not a trademark of a duly elected president, and the buildings that will randomly collapse that don't in areas that don't vote for Putin,
and the journalists that mysteriously get killed and go missing.
Yeah, so
for sure,
definitely not a guy you want backing you or to be super friendly with, but neither is Xi Jinping or the
who is the Iranian leader? It's like
is it the Ayatollah?
The Ayatollah.
Yeah. You not the guy.
I don't know what his name is. They have a president too, though. They have a president or a prime minister and an Ayatollah. The Ayatollah is like the supreme leader.
Yeah, the supreme leader, and he kind of makes all the decisions, is I think what I remember from what I know about Iran. But it's weird. The response I've seen to that coming out, I saw a lot of people saying, well, hopefully China and Iran's hackers are better than Russia's. Like, after 4 years of Russiagate and, oh my gosh, this is so awful that Trump, like, that Russia helped Trump, which I don't know if I even believe that Russia helped Trump that much. But then for people to come out and say, and they're the same people that cried about, freaked out about Russia interfering in the 2016 election, to say stuff like, hopefully China and Iran do a better job than Russia to help Biden, is crazy to me. Just the hypocrisy there is wild.
Yeah, they don't care, and they're unfortunately now it's set up for Trump to use an excuse when if and when he loses. Like I said, I don't know if he's going to or not, but now he's gonna say, oh, well, Chinese and Iranian-backed hackers like won the election for Biden.
Well, that's another thing I thought was super funny, that because I saw people with that response too, like, oh, just another excuse for Trump to use. Like, the Democrats didn't just use that excuse for why Hillary Clinton lost for 4 years. It's the pot calling the kettle black. The idea that it's a bad thing, not that it's a bad thing that Trump is going to say that Iran and China mess with the election if he loses 2 months after, or how long after the impeachment trial that came off the back of that exact same claim, is just, that's just weird to me.
The whole thing is weird. Did you know that during like Corona and like while going back to Putin, while he was like dissolving the Duma and like instituting these constitutional changes, because of Corona, he used Corona to ban protesting. Like, he took all of these steps to. The thing about Vladimir Putin that I don't think people realize is like how smart that guy is. I've watched so many interviews of like American journalists interviewing him. I saw one with Chris Wallace. I saw one with Megyn Kelly.
Nothing's on accident. He knows exactly what he's doing.
Dude, I have never seen someone so put together in my life. Mm-hmm. In my life. It's weird. And Xi Jinping is very similar. Like, they're both very well put together and they're both very well spoken.
Yeah.
And I think I just wonder how the conversations between Trump and like Vladimir Putin go.
It seems like fire and ice, like total opposites trying to.
It's weird.
Talk, which is funny because I think not so much Xi Jinping, but Putin and Trump both have these like cults of personality, but on opposite ends of the spectrum. Like, Trump comes in and is like, I'm going to shake things up in the establishment. And Putin's like, I am the establishment. Exactly. And so it's weird to see that they get along. Yeah. Kind of. That they're trying to work together maybe. But yeah, it's so funny that now that there's the mention that foreign countries might be helping Joe Biden get elected, it's crickets on the left for about how, okay, well, they're doing it for Trump too, so I guess it's okay. Like, two wrongs don't make a right. You need to come out. And I think that would be a good way to win people over after kind of the failure that Russiagate was, if they came out as hard against Iran and China as they did against Russia, if that happens, because then it's like, well, so maybe they hated Trump, so that's why they did Russiagate, but at least they're consistent, which isn't going to happen. If Joe Biden gets elected and any news comes out that it was like China and Iran played a part in it, nothing will happen. I don't think anything will happen.
It's a weird time that illegal stuff like that, like, dude, I don't know how much illegal stuff goes into elections. Like, there has to be some crazy stuff about elections that we don't know about.
Well, because we catch a lot of illegal stuff, and you have to assume you're not catching most of the illegal things.
Yeah.
That
What do you
happen.
think about mail-in ballots?
Mail-in ballots, I don't. So the claim that Trump makes that there's going to be massive fraud, I don't agree with. I think that's hyperbole. But so is the claim by a lot of Democrats that there's no indication that there's going to be any fraud, because I think not only does it open it up for fraud, there's potential for fraud, and to say anything otherwise isn't true. It opens up potential for fraud. Maybe it doesn't happen as much, but I think the real issue with mail-in ballots is the amount of mail-in ballots that we're going to see be discredited or not accepted is going to be huge. I mean, I think a number came out of California for the Democratic primaries that 150,000 mail-in ballots weren't accepted because they either, through no fault of the voter, I think it was that they arrived at the post office a day after the polls closed, and they were they were mailed before the polls closed. So through no fault of the voter, 150,000 ballots weren't counted.
That's gonna be a nightmare. So, I think you're right. So mass voter fraud, probably not true. We haven't seen it in any of the states that have done it, that have implemented mail-in ballot voting. So I don't think massive fraud is really an issue. I think that states that don't already have it implemented are going to have a hard time implementing it. So that's what I'm a little bit worried about, is states that, like Utah, for example, already has mail-in voting in place. Mm-hmm. We've done a very good job at it. Florida, I think, is the same way. They might only have absentee voting, but regardless, those states that have that in place, a little bit easier. But a state that's going to be new to and they're going to implement universal mail-in ballot voting, that's going to be new to that sort of thing, I could see an issue there.
There's tons of
not
logistical
necessarily
problems.
Because of fraud, but yeah, because of logistical problems of accepting hundreds of thousands of ballots in the mail.
How do you count those? How do you get all that done?
How do you verify signatures? How do you verify driver's licenses?
Exactly. And the people, it's weird to me that the Democratic Party has come out so hard, like, mail-in ballots are totally fine, like, no problems with them, like, don't worry about it, because I think largely the typical demographic that votes for Democrats is the ones that are going to be largely affected, like first-time voters.
Yeah.
What, they make a mistake on their mail-in ballot, they don't have a poll worker to help them or anything there, it just gets rejected, it gets tossed out. And so that demographic is going to be hugely affected. I'm sure so it seems weird to kind of come out with the stance that no problems with mail-in ballots, everything's going to be okay. When I think if you came out and said, okay, there are these problems with mail-in ballots, we need to figure them out, you could start dealing with the logistics and maybe not completely fix it, but mitigate a lot of those issues.
Sure. So I think another issue I see with the voting system in the United States, do you agree with a national holiday for voting? Like, a lot of countries have a national holiday for voting.
I think it would be a good idea.
I think so too. I think that, what do you think about online voting?
Online voting scares me because, I mean, what was it, a week ago or 2 weeks ago that the Twitter accounts of, like, all these people got hacked? Like, I don't know how you make online voting secure. I think if you can figure it out, online voting's not a horrible idea, and you could go from the super low, like abysmal 40% voter turnout we have now to a much higher voter turnout. But I think the safer way to try and increase the voter turnout is to do a national holiday for voting.
I think that, yeah, I think so too. I think online voting should be a thing. I think that the infrastructure within our election system is already so that we could make it a thing if we wanted to. On the part of the government. Now you brought up Twitter. I mean, Twitter's a private institution. That's a lot different than per se like thousands of Americans' information being stolen from the Homeland Security headquarters or database. Like that getting hacked, I would set off red flags to me. But I think that our infrastructure, if we were to, if there was a secure site that the American people could go to and vote, that was run by like Homeland Security or something like that, I think that'd be huge for voting rights in the country.
Yeah, so I think that's a great idea if you can find a way to do it securely. But I don't think you can make an attempt at it until you know for sure that it's going to be secure.
Yeah.
I mean, with as much, the amount of... I don't think you can discount a company like Twitter getting hacked as not a... And maybe the U.S. government would be a little bit better. I don't know. I don't think that's a easy assumption to make.
You don't think we have better cybersecurity software than Twitter?
I think we do, but what happens? I mean, think about the last time you went to like the DMV website or something. Like, I don't know, because I think there's more issues with that than just cybersecurity. What happens if 300 million people try and go on one website? Or obviously not 300 million people, but I think there's there's logistical issues like the mail-in ballots that need to be solved and fixed, and there need to be no kinks. When you do it electronically like that, you can't have any major issues going into it. And so it's not something that should just be rolled out haphazardly. I think you need to go for a national holiday for voting. I think that helps a ton until you can get to the point where you have a 100% secure online voting system. I just don't think that's there yet.
See, I don't know. I don't know if the United States government has the tech to like secure a website like that. I would assume so, but I'm not sure.
The issue with it isn't that they don't have the technology to secure something like that. It's that people have to interact with it too. If it was just a website that you didn't have to interact with, or a database you didn't have to interact with, there was no interaction, that's where stuff's super secure. But what happens? I mean, so how do you log in? Like I'm assuming you'd have to log in. You can't just go onto a random website and click a button. You have to log in. So what about like phishing scams and stuff like that? That has to be something you think about, that because if there's a password, someone's gonna try and hack it.
Yeah, I could see that. In a very limited sense, I could see that. You could make your password like your social security number, and your username is your driver's license number. I think there's ways that we could implement it. I think you're right though. I'm not sure if the tech is there yet. We've never tried. I couldn't see online voting in my lifetime, to be completely honest with you. I can't imagine a day where I can go onto my computer or my phone. Imagine if there was an app to vote. Yeah. I don't see that in my lifetime.
I'm a little bit more optimistic about that I think that should be a focus, and that if we devoted time and effort to it, it could be something that happens relatively soon. I mean,
I don't think the Republicans let it happen. I don't think the Republicans will let something like that ever happen.
Yeah, I don't know. So you'd need a Democrat president and House and Senate, like complete control of that. But I think that, I mean, how old are smartphones? I mean, smartphones, the iPhone came out in what, like 2004, 2005 or something like that. So it's been 15 years, and I think we're young, so we lose a little bit of perspective on that. But the idea that online voting could even be a thing is relatively new. And so I think to say that it won't happen in the next 50, 60 years, it's hard to do that because so much can change so quickly.
So I think it can happen. I'm saying that it won't because there are people in power that will not let it happen unless we get a very, very progressive president and a very progressive Senate and House. Because I think that even moderate Democrats are going to be very, very sketchy about allowing like an app, like having a voting app.
Yeah, so what happens, so I guess that's another issue, is people come out pretty hard against like voter ID laws. People don't like that, but what do you do to secure something like an app? You'd probably need something like voter ID.
Yeah, or even an app where you just like hold your camera over like your social security card or
Yeah, so what about people that don't have social security cards?
they can't vote.
Do you
Or
get
driver's
social
licenses.
If
you have a driver's license, everyone has ID. Like I saw this video of like for some reason, like about a year ago, I'm not sure if you caught on to this, but like for a week or a month or something like that, they were saying that making people show their ID at the polls is racist because minorities don't carry IDs.
Yeah, I
and
saw
then there's
that
like
too.
there's like this black guy and he was walking around like
New York or something.
Yeah, New York, like minority neighborhoods, and he was like, Do you carry an ID with you? And every single one of them said yes.
Yeah.
It was like white people that were making up that minorities don't have
why
IDs.
do you think...
And I don't want to speak for black people or any minorities, but it's like, come on, everyone has ID.
Why do you think there's such that, like, that idea has become prevalent that...
Dude.
Instituting voter ID laws would be... like disenfranchise minorities.
I don't get it because white people probably made it up, dude, and I don't care. They probably did.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen, like, when I go on Instagram or Twitter, like, this isn't a hot topic issue, so I think I can say this. Like, I've seen multiple videos of minorities like saying, I know this is like, what's that word when you like pick one case of something and you use that?
Cherry picking.
Yeah, I know this is like cherry picking, but like I've seen quite a few videos where they just walk up to like a random sample of minorities and they're like, hey, do you carry an ID with you? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, do you think you should have an ID to vote? And they're like, yeah. And I feel like if you surveyed, let's say 10,000 minorities and said, do you believe you should have an ID presented to vote? I think they would almost all of them would say yes.
Yeah, I think it's way more of an issue requiring ID. Doesn't seem like it would disenfranchise minorities at all. And then especially when you have bigger issues like having not having a day to vote, not having a national holiday to vote, giving people a day off to vote, because that disenfranchises anybody that needs to work. It disenfranchises a huge portion of the population, and that disproportionately affects minorities. So it's weird that the left Democrats would pick that hill to die on like voter ID laws, when they should be attacking like getting a day to vote.
Yeah, and they did. They tried to pass a national holiday, and Mitch McConnell wouldn't let it go to the Senate floor.
That's
they
weird.
Passed it in the House. Mitch McConnell is super corrupt. But that's besides the point. I think voter ID laws are important. Now, I think that having a social security card may put some people in a unique situation because I don't believe everyone carries their social on them. So yeah. I will say that showing a form of ID, I think everyone has that. And I think to say that minorities just don't have that, I think in itself is like disingenuous.
It's the like subtle racism.
Yeah, that's like subtle
racism
of low expectations. Like, I'm sorry, but minorities have IDs. Like, that's something that they have. And I know I'm not a minority, but I think I can pretty confidently say that. Everyone has some form of ID.
Well, and
whether it's a social or a
worrisome,
driver's license, a birth certificate.
Yeah, if it's that worrisome, just make it easier to get ID. Make it something that's it's not tied to a driver's license or social security. It's just, and I don't know how you do it. It would take some more thought, but just some form of ID that goes with voting. That it's like your voter card. That it's just, you show that.
Or they mail it to you, dude. They mail it to you, and it has like your I guess that would be logistically kind of hard. They would have to like verify your address or something like that. But they could mail you like a voter ID card that contains a unique username and password, and then that's backed up with some specific question to. Or there's ways that this can be implemented.
Yeah.
I think that the people in power won't let it be implemented, even as much as I think it should be, and certainly as long as conservatives are empowered, right?
Yeah, that's the craziest thing to me is that when someone like Mitch McConnell comes out, and I don't know why you would be
I don't get it.
against
It's weird, huh?
a voting
It's really
holiday
weird.
and how you can even and I'd have to look into it more. I don't even know the reasoning he presented because the only reasoning that I can think of for that is because you don't want poor people to vote.
Right.
And that would benefit the Republican Party, I think.
Well, yeah, I don't even know about like poor people. I think just people in like minority communities that have to work like to support their family.
I think
or,
that's
like,
poor people. I don't even think that's specific. I think it's anybody that's poor has that problem. If you can't skip a day of work to go vote, and I think it disproportionately affects minority communities for sure.
Yeah.
And that's where it would help Republicans is if minorities couldn't vote because they tend to vote Democrat. But I think it's an across the board issue where anybody that can't skip a day of work to vote should be kind of outraged that they're being disenfranchised like that.
And most of those people, I shouldn't say most of those people would vote Democrat, but I think that a majority of people I know that a majority of the people in the country are Democrats. I know they have to be. I think, like, if you were to, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. That in and of itself is an indication that we have more Democrats in this country than Republicans. But I think that Democrats historically have had less people show up to vote than Republicans.
Well, because of the demographics that typically vote Democrat. Young people that, as bad as the 40% turnout rate for the general population, I think our demographic, like just out of high school, college students don't show up to vote. We saw that this year in the Democratic primaries where I think a majority of young people liked Bernie Sanders a lot. Joe Biden won the Democratic primary because people just didn't show up to vote. And I think I also have issue with that because I think that's putting blame on the voter, which is difficult to do, but statistically young people don't turn out to vote very much, and I don't know how you fix that, but that's something you need to fix too.
Right. Let me ask you about, because I know we've talked about this before, not on the podcast, but let me ask you about gerrymandering laws, like redlining. What are your thoughts on gerrymandering?
I think it's bad. I don't think it ever gets fixed because both parties do it and both parties think it benefits them, or else they'd fix it.
Responsibility of the courts to fix it?
I think it could come down to that. I don't know if it ever gets pushed hard enough though, because it takes somebody whose goal was to fix gerrymandering to sue and take it up all the way through and get to the Supreme Court. And I don't even know if it gets passed under the current Supreme Court.
They've refused to rule on it so far.
Yeah, which is bad. I think you need to. I don't know how you fix it. I don't think it gets fixed, and I think it's a bad thing. I think the net effect of it is that it kind of cancels out, which doesn't mean it's okay, but I don't think it'll get fixed because of that.
Yeah, I think constitutional amendment could fix it.
Yeah,
I think that
I just don't think it's going to happen.
Right. Do you think a constitutional amendment will ever happen? Another one?
I don't know. Everything's so partisan now that whoever proposed it'd have to be something that I don't think it will ever happen. I don't know.
Bush, I'm not sure if you've heard this, but Bush tried to make it a constitutional amendment that only men and women could get married. I thought that was like super, first of all, that's like super Bush-like. Like I thought Bush was just sort of to go back to what I was saying, I think, I'm not sure if you heard this, but Bush tried to issue a constitutional amendment to say marriage was only between a man and a woman. Did you ever hear about this?
I
Like,
don't
do you know
remember
about
that.
this? He never actually like went forward with it, but that was a lot of discussions. There was a lot of discussion of that within the Bush camp. I was like, that made me think like Bush could have been a good president, but I think the people around him were like so toxic that he ended up being borderline failure.
Yeah.
Iraq was probably the worst national policy decision ever. One of the worst.
Well, what's crazy is that was like bipartisan. It was horrible.
Yeah, dude.
And it
How
was bipartisan.
crazy is that? How
Like,
crazy is that?
That's one of the last the last major decision I can remember that was widely bipartisan. Not the last one, but one of the biggest ones that was bipartisan, and I think almost everybody agrees now that maybe that's one thing that is nice about things being so partisan now, is that you probably won't get something like that. But who knows? Yemen in the Obama administration.
Dude, airstrikes, drone strikes. Let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about national policy. Is it the United States' responsibility to influence another country's political process in any way?
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think it's kind of fallen on the United States, because I think there needs to be some oversight to that. You don't want, that's kind of how World War II started, is because countries were like, okay, we'll stay out of the way. Germany's just doing Germany. We can't really, we shouldn't really, it was, what's the word? There's a word for it. I can't remember right now. I'm blanking, but they just kind of backed off of Germany until it got super bad. I think the United States is too proactive on that, where it's like, and I don't even know if that's probably not a good comparison, because a lot of the times the United States intervenes. It's not Hitler in
Right. I think even the most isolationist person in the world can agree that we should have gone to war with Japan and Germany, really.
Yeah, but I think that's the issue, is the idea is good, that you need to be a little bit more proactive to stop something like that from happening, but it's been taken to the umpteenth degree by warmongering presidents and the military industrial people like John Bolton, who is being praised by the Democrats for coming out against Trump when, objectively should be one of the worst people on the planet.
Dude, and he wouldn't testify during the impeachment hearings, and the Democrats still had his back. Still tried to say that what he wrote in that book was totally authentic and accurate. MSNBC and CNN were defending the book.
Ran so many stories about that stuff. Crazy.
Dude.
It doesn't make any sense, but I think, we should talk about that, because when that came out, some of the claims that he made in the book, I think he said the Trump supported the concentration camps in China for the Uyghur Muslims. Wild. So
Why would Trump support that? To build his already good relationship with China?
Yeah, while he's coming out, he has
such a good relationship with China.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense, and I think it's super telling that he wouldn't testify in front. And then he's tried to come out and he said, well, it was just because they didn't subpoena me. And it's like, if it was this bad, you
had the opportunity. They invited him to testify.
Yeah, you should be tried if this stuff was this bad. And
dude, he should be tried for war crimes.
Well,
he should be tried for war crimes against Iraq.
Every president in the last 30 years should be tried for war crimes, and a lot of people in the administrations, to be honest.
Not to change subjects again.
Yeah.
Can a president be charged with a crime?
I think that sets a dangerous precedent, as partisan as stuff is now. But I think you need to do something so that a president, And really, we're talking about like war crimes. Like that's the major crime that a president is going to commit.
Or not even. I see war crimes. I wouldn't even go that far because I think war crimes are like borderline subjective because you can always just fall back on I was protecting the nation's interests or sovereignty. Like war crimes are that accusation is very vague, although I think
That's
it's very
true.
important. Like
Yeah.
war crimes are terrible. I mean, I don't think we should be involved almost anywhere in the world, but I think everything's a war crime. But that being said, I think you couldn't charge a president with war crimes. I
Yeah.
think it's in his executive power to be the head of the military, and the very act of killing a civilian in another country, in my eyes, is a war crime. So that being said, another country that we're not at war with, I believe that's a war crime. I believe that if Trump bombed Syria and killed a civilian, I believe that is a war crime.
Well, and part of the problem is we haven't gone to war. If you're going to go start attacking places,
Yeah.
like we
issue
have
a declaration of war.
we have I mean, it has to go through Congress, right? It's supposed to go through
Yep.
Congress if you're going to declare war. So I think it's a problem that, I mean, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, Trump's administration, is there's kind of this idea that, well, the president is the head of the military, so we can kind of conduct these pseudo wars where it's not actually a war, so we don't have to go through Congress. We can do whatever we want, but I'm the commander in chief, so I'm going to make these decisions. And I mean, so I guess it can't be a war crime if there's no war, but I don't know. Like I
think war crime is like defined.
I know. I'm
Okay,
just being
okay.
kind of facetious, but it's weird to me that has gone on for so long, and it seems like no one will call out those people. I mean,
It's the military-industrial complex. Tulsi Gabbard did. She was called a Russian asset by Hillary Clinton. So.
yeah, I think that shows you that there's some corruption there, that you call out something that I mean, I say this a lot, but it's like objectively bad, that there's like war profiteering. I mean, we see it in fiction all the time. The war profiteer is the bad guy, but then in real life, all the politicians support the war profiteers.
Yep.
And so then Tulsi Gabbard calls him out and immediately turned on by the face of
The
the
whole
establishment,
Democratic
Hillary
establishment.
Clinton. And so, yeah, that's wild to me.
So let me ask you this. Let's say today President Trump goes out and directly appeals to China to interfere in the election. There's ample evidence. It's literally released. Documents are released that prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump solicited help for an election from a foreign country.
Well, I think that's what
Do you
impeachment
think
is for.
Trump should be charged?
I don't.
So let me get even more specific than that. Let's get even more specific. Let's say video comes out of Trump hitting his wife in the Oval Office.
Yeah, so that's.
Can he be charged with the crime?
I think you could. That's what impeachment is for.
I mean, it's a formal charge, but can the Justice Department charge him with a crime?
I don't know if you can while he's president, but then if you impeach him once he's not president, you can, I think.
See, I think you could charge him. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't. There's no law that says you can't. There's a memo.
Though.
There's a precedent from who? It wasn't a court that decided it. It was a memo in the Justice Department that decided that you can't charge a sitting president with a crime. That word precedent is like so overused to me in like the bureaucracy that I think
That's
it's
true.
just stupid and it's lost all of its meaning. Now, if you're talking about like Supreme Court precedent, that's a lot different. But like, I think that the Justice Department, if there is no law saying that a president can't be charged with a crime and it is not in the Constitution, charge the president with a crime, right?
Yeah.
I think I say that, but it's hard for me to substantiate that argument because I think Robert Mueller, wanted Trump to get impeached. I think that the reason he didn't charge him is because he felt that
Trump was going to get
he was going to get impeached and that was going to be the charge.
Yeah.
So I see where you're coming from with like impeachment being the formal constitutional remedy for an illegal action by the president. But I also I say that, and then I just think like other countries where like the Justice Department there and the military they try to pull off coups on the
Yeah, like a
president,
coup
and that stuff
d'etat.
scares me, and I just don't know. But
It's
if the president were to
difficult
go out
for
to murder
sure.
someone, it's like you couldn't. I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough for sure. And I think part of it is the nature of a lot of the crimes we see presidents commit. Or I don't know how many crimes we've seen presidents commit besides war crimes. You run into the issue that as partisan as things are, like, what do you start? I mean, if a president could be charged with a crime, I have no doubt that Trump would get a parking ticket and the Democrats would want him arrested for like something like that. I mean, it's just, and the Republicans would do the same thing to a Democratic president. And just the partisanship on that scares me. I think that's why I think you just go with impeachment, which you run into other problems with partisanship, because even no matter what Trump did, I don't think he gets impeached because the Republicans had a majority in the Senate. So, or I guess he got impeached. He doesn't get indicted.
And don't you worry about that? Don't you worry that the only reason he didn't get what's the word? There's impeachment, and then there's indictment or whatever, a removal from office. Don't you worry that the only reason he didn't is because Republicans held the Senate?
Yes, a little bit, but also I think you can flip that on its head, and it's, so why not just nitpick something about some president and push through, like if you held both houses, because I guarantee if the Democrats had held the Senate, Trump would have been removed from office. 100%. I mean, it was...
I mean, they would have to hold it by 66 seats. They would have to have 66 seats.
Well, yeah, that's true. So, I mean, so I guess I don't think that if Republicans... I mean, as long as Republicans have more than 40. But it's just worrying a little bit that could happen if you had a majority like that.
Yeah. And keep in mind, like, the process the Democrats ran for this impeachment was an absolute joke.
It was a circus.
It was a literal circus, and I'm as liberal as they come. That was a circus. That was the most poorly executed impeachment I have. I say the worst I've ever seen, but that's the only one I've ever seen. But they could have at least tried to be bipartisan. At least like gone out of their way to invite Republicans to these meetings behind closed doors, or like these decisions about the process of impeachment. Let the Republicans invite witnesses. But on that same token, like, the Republicans weren't going to let John Bolton come testify. Like, Mitch in the Senate, Mitch McConnell was never going to let that happen.
Yeah, so that's a tough one, and it's like and the obstruction of Congress charge, like, weird.
Dude, they lost
pulled
all
it out
legitimacy.
of nowhere, just
literally
out of the air.
Pulled out of nowhere. They lost all legitimacy with those charges. It was obstruction of Congress, and what was the other one? Obstruction of justice.
Abuse of power. It was abuse of power.
Oh, it was abuse of power.
Which, that one, I think, and you saw Mitt Romney, who, whatever your thoughts on Mitt Romney are, like, he was the only Republican that voted to impeach Trump.
Yeah, he's just a talking head. I don't take anything he says seriously.
But he did distinguish between the two. He voted yes on the abuse of power, and then was like, obstruction of Congress is crazy. Like, that to me is Congress, like, reaching for extra power and trying to dissolve the separation of powers.
Yep.
If obstruction of Congress was a real thing, which we've seen it's not after that trial, then Congress would basically control the legislative branch.
Sure.
Because then you could claim anything was obstruction of Congress.
You mean Congress would control the executive branch?
Yeah, not legislative. That's my bad.
I see, and I'm more of the belief that Congress should have more say in the executive branch. I think the executive bureaucracy, there is so much secrecy and corruption and establishment there. It's like, it like reeks. Like, I can't even smell it, but it just reeks of corruption.
Well, this isn't
the entire executive branch does, but the legislative branch does too.
Yeah.
The only problem is we can get rid of the legislative branch we can't get rid of the bureaucracy that's underneath the president, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Do you know how much power the State Department has? I can name one person in the State Department, and it's freaking Mike Pompeo. I
Yeah.
have no idea who the assistant director of the State Department is. I have no idea who runs foreign relations with China. All those people are unelected. They're like either appointed or they move up the ranks of the system.
Well, this isn't real. There's that show, The West Wing. That's a
Yeah.
pretty popular show, and I just watched it in the last few months, and it's not real, but I think it's probably more accurate than you think. And the most shocking thing to me was how much the president in the show, his chief of staff, how much power his chief of staff had. Every time, I mean, the chief of staff made like crazy decisions, and every time I'd turn to my family and be like, what the heck is going on? Like, how the fact that an unelected official could do that.
How weird,
And
dude.
I am cautious to draw parallels between a fictional show and real life, but from what I've seen and my understanding of kind of that bureaucracy is that I think those people have, in my opinion, way too much power for an
100%,
unelected official.
100%.
Yeah.
It's weird that there has been no pushback by the legislative branch to check on the executive. So, like, when the Republicans were in power, it was like this political persecution. I shouldn't say persecution, but they essentially put Hillary on trial after Benghazi, and they focused on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the Democrats, they were focused on the Robert Mueller investigation. They were focused on Donald Trump's dealings with Russia. I'm surprised that Congress has not decided to more vividly criticize the executive bureaucracy than they have in recent years, right?
Yeah, you run into an issue with that, though, that I don't know what the solution is. I don't think you can elect those people, because it's like, who elects those people? Unless, I guess, you publish it, like, they're on the ballot.
See, that's the problem, though, right?
I don't know
And
what
you
the solution is.
And you have like these there are these, what are they called, the inspector generals of like each department.
Yeah.
One thing that's crazy about Trump is he has removed a lot of inspector generals.
Yeah.
Like a lot. He has the power to do so, he can. But why is that not a bigger issue? Like, it gets one day of media coverage and then it's done. That to me is more of an abuse of power than a lot of the
Anything
things
in
the
Russia
Democrats charged
yeah.
him for. Like, you should be taking a serious look every time an inspector general gets fired, because if they asked him to come testify and it turns out that inspector general was investigating some aspect of the Trump presidency or the executive branch that Trump didn't want him to know about, he or she, that could be very real grounds for impeachment.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Part of the problem is, and I think Trump is taking it to the extreme, is in those positions you want somebody that's like with your administration 100% on board. And I think that's where the removals come from. But in like regular positions, but then when you start removing the like kind of watchdogs, that's where it gets super scary to me.
Right. I think we call it.
Yeah, I think we call it here. Yeah. That's a good one.
That was a good podcast. Oh, Henry. Sorry, I'm just